All right, so here's another presentation that comes from my evaluative essay, or this actually kind of goes onto another tangent. The evaluative essay, I wrote that in 2011. That was one of the earlier years of my studies in the doctorate program in Christian spirituality. And so here is another kind of direction that my studies went in. And ultimately, this is going to this will lead to, is a bit of a setup for next week when we get into the study of religion and creativity and how I came to that topic as well. And this is more getting into how I really incorporated the study of art into my studies. So part of this is also kind of going back to earlier in the semester reflection papers and kind of seeing that this class seems to have a pretty high amount of interest in art and creativity. So kind of made me think, oh, this could be interesting for students in this class for me to talk about some of my studies. Okay, this is kind of a review of some of the things that we're talking about earlier. Yep, and so when I was in that program at Graduate Theological Union in Christian spirituality, the program itself in Christian spirituality, other areas would have different requirements, but we were also to engage in a religion beyond Christianity, which was interesting because that's what I wanted to do anyway. And sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes students think, oh, it's kind of a hassle to have all of these, this is required and this is required and this is required. But I was like, oh, I'm glad this is required because, this really, I can go back to the monastery and say, yeah, I'm taking these courses. These are required for me to take these courses. So that was helpful. And we were also to engage in an academic discipline beyond theology and religious studies. So I was really looking at art history as my outside discipline. You can kind of see that makes sense. It'd be nice if I were able to do a slideshow where these things could come up more gradually, but here's what it is. These are a few of my theological areas of studies as well, just to kind of say, it's like, yeah, I mean, I have studied some in theology and I've written some in theology, so it's not like I've totally ignored that whole part of things as well. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in theology is eschatology, the study of last things such as death, judgment, heaven, and hell. These are kind of like the four things that have traditionally been associated with eschatology, somewhat similar to apocalypticism, the Book of Revelation, art in the Catholic missions to Asia. So you can see that's also tied into encounter of Christianity with Asian religions, theological aesthetics, that's much more of a philosophical. Iconoclasm, that's basically part of the history of art in Christianity, and you can see similar in other religions as well. I've had an opportunity to study with most of these are a few scholars in art and religion. Alejandro Garcia Rivera was a theologian in theological aesthetics. He was one of the reasons I was interested in going to Graduate Theological Union in the first place. I enrolled in a class with him the first semester I was there. Unfortunately, he was battling with cancer. And over the course of the semester, it was a co-taught class. over the course of the semester, he was hospitalized and passed away. The other professor who was co-teaching, let us know, and then we finished the class that way. Michael Morris was a Dominican. I took a course with him that was called Death, Judgment, Heaven, and Hell. So really getting into art and eschatology. He was a reader for one of my comprehensive exams. He has also recently, he passed away some years ago. I took a course with Mia Makazuki, who studies iconoclasm. Galvan Bailey studies art in Catholic missions, more focused on missions in Latin America. John and Jane Dillenberger. I did not take a class with either of those, Jane Dillenberger has written two books. One, a book on the religious art of Andy Warhol, another on the religious art of Pablo Picasso. Since then, I have found her writings in both of those books to be quite interesting. Eventually, fall 2011, the same semester that I took the course in hermeneutics, I took this course at the University of California, Traditions of Art History Writing in the 20th Century. Another one of these, I would be kind of fun if they would come up gradually. But so here are some of the various art historians that we looked at. It was interesting, similar to this class. Like, this is not a class where we're studying Moses and Jesus and Muhammad and Siddhartha. We're not really studying any of the major figures of religion. We're studying the figures of religious studies. Similar to this class that I took at University of California. We weren't studying Michelangelo or Picasso or Raphael or Rembrandt. We were studying the art historians. Part of that was for me to try to see if there was an art historian that I really kind of felt a connection with, as far as that I would kind of, in some ways, take on their approach in my own study, in future presentations as well. So actually, one of the art historians that I was particularly drawn to in this class that I took with Dr. Elizabeth Hernig at the University of California, Ernst Chris and Otto Kurz. And they wrote this book, Legend, Myth, and Magic in the Image of the Artist. So, if you go back here and look at some of these art historians, some of them, it's kind of like religious studies. Well, maybe not as much, but I mean, these art historians, some of them might deal with religion, some of them might not. If they don't really pay that much attention to religion for one reason or another, that's okay. I mean, they're art historians. They're not necessarily supposed to, but I was definitely more interested in those art historians that did engage in religion in some ways. And so that's why when we were reading about Chris and Kurz, really kind of jumped out at me as like, okay, here are some art historians that are dealing with religion in some way, interesting way. I'll just keep moving along through this question, but something to think about is connections between sociology and art. That's because their book, they present themselves as taking a sociological approach to art history and religion. This book deals with society's attitudes towards artists. And so in that way, it is kind of a sociological look at art, but also has something to do with religion as well. they point to a particular time once artists started to sign their works was a major transition in art history um, towards like, okay, the artist has signed their works and getting a thought of like, well, who are artists? What are characteristics of artists? What do we expect of artists? How do we think of artists? And things like that. Um, Always one great way for scholars to let you know what their thesis is to just say our thesis is this. From the moment artists made their appearance on historical records, there were certain kind of stereotype notions linked with artists and the artist persona, and still influence how we view artists. One is the story of Giotto, in one of the famous art history books by Giorgio Vasari, Lives of Artists, that he wrote about many of the Italian masters, Michelangelo and so forth. Just quickly, the story is that there's an envoy that sent out from Rome into the countryside, and they're trying to find the greatest artists in the world and bring them back to Rome and make all the greatest artwork for the Pope. They find Giotto as a young boy tending sheep. And they say, one variation of the story is, hey, we're lost. Can you give us directions? And he gives them directions and then says, oh, yeah, I like to draw a little bit myself. And then they ask him to draw something, and he draws something so amazing that they say, oh, come to Rome with us and be an artist. So this mentality is one that is kind of an example of this kind of heroicization, mytholization of the artist. Okay. And here's a few of the final questions, but I'll pick some of this up. Again, this is kind of a setup for next Monday. Friday, we will continue with student presentations. So with that, I don't think I assigned a reading, but with that, thank you all and see you next time.